Hello, everyone, and welcome back. This is part two of our Teacher Talent 101 on how to ace your teaching interview. So, in part one, we talked about resume prep, and then here in part two, in less than 10 minutes, we're going to talk about interview prep. So, how can we avoid our nerves and embrace confidence, especially when we're meeting with the administrative staff of the school that we're really wanting? So, a couple of things, make sure that you know the lingo. So, obviously, if you've been teaching for a while, you're very familiar with the acronyms that we use in education that change on the daily, it seems. But for some reason, if you're new to teaching or if you've been out of teaching for a while and you're just now coming back into it, here are some things you should keep in mind that you need to know what it means, and how it is used in an instructional setting. So things like IEP, which is a student's individualized education plan, RTI, which is response to intervention. So those struggling students who are put in an extra supplemental instructional setting. RTI2-B, so that's a response to intervention, but it's also behavior. So if we have students who are struggling with behavior, they would be going to this class. Like for us, it's not our R2B at my school, it's more of like a positive behavior sort of tiered response. So, like when we do like treat days or reward days, that follows under RTI 2B. Ames Web, which is a universal screener that's usually utilized for math and reading to see where students are and if students need more intervention. So usually Ames Web screeners are used, and then those students who fit into those groupings of tier one, tier two, tier three will go to your RTI class for either math or reading instruction. STEM or STEAM, so that is a focus on science, technology, engineering, and math. Also, art can be intertwined in there as well. So make sure that you're researching job listings from multiple school districts to make sure that you have a list of lingo that is commonly used within teaching interviews. Okay. Because what you don't want to happen is you don't want to walk into an interview and then they start asking you specifically about IEPs and you have no idea on how to do that with special education students. All right, so here are some of the common interview question categories, and then we're going to walk through them and help you adjust your answers. Okay, so a lot of times we're trying to get a good read on your personality when you walk into the room, how you present yourself, are you confident, etc. How do you scaffold for student understanding? How do you manage your classroom? How do you discipline students when they need disciplining? How do you handle conflict with your colleagues? This is huge. It's important. How do you plan curriculum? How do you set up for an inclusion, a special ed co-teaching situation? Are there any extracurricular activities that you're interested in leading? And then also, why this school? What led you here? So let's take a look at these. So, personality questions would come up in the form of, like, what is one word that describes you? Or what is an area of strength that you have in the classroom? A lot of times you'll see, or I've heard the question, what is an area of weakness? Okay, so we're trying to make a strength sound like a weakness. We're not telling them, long traumatic situations from years ago. We're just, got to play the game. If you could describe school in one word, what would it be? So these personality questions are going to gauge different aspects of how you would relate to everyone within the school community. Basically, to see, are you a culture fit? Then here are some questions. So, scaffolding for student understanding. We know that every student that comes into our classrooms is not going to be on grade level. So, therefore, how are we going to scaffold their understanding? So here are some questions that might come up about that. So, a student has skill deficits in a specific standard. What instructional supports would you use to help them grow in areas of achievement and mastery? It's important to think about because we will, in fact, in our real life classes, have students with skill deficits on specific standards, and it's our job to bridge that gap. After several formative assessments, you notice a student still isn't understanding the concept or the standard being taught. What do you do? Also, a good question. So, these scaffolding questions are going to evaluate how you assess your students, how you identify skill deficits, and then also how you achieve student growth. Because a lot of times we have to take them from here to here in about 9 months of instruction, even if that much. And we have to prove ourselves on our state standardized tests. So then the next category question is classroom management and discipline. And this is huge as well because we're constantly, aside from knowing the content, we have to also make sure that our students are learning the content, but then also that they are being productive classroom students. Okay, so here are some questions that you might encounter. A student isn't engaged in your lesson and puts his or her head down for the remainder of the class. How do you handle this situation? Okay, this was a real question that was asked of me during an interview that I had with one of the schools that I eventually was hired for. How I approached the situation was basically, yes, I see the student is not engaged. They have their head down. Instead of berating the student or drawing attention to the student, I simply just go over to them and I just quietly ask them if they're okay. Because sometimes students are tired. Sometimes there's an issue at home that we're not aware of. Sometimes they're not feeling well. Sometimes it's defiance, but most of the time there's a situation beyond our control, and it's just good to check in with the student and then kind of build rapport with the student and move on from there to see if there's something that we can do to help the student get caught back up. Another question is a fight breaks out in your classroom, list steps you would take to prevent another classroom disturbance from happening again. So questions like this would be, maybe change up your seating chart or get to know the students, contact the parents, get the parents involved as well. Basically, when questions are asked like this, it's just to make sure that you're not constantly filling out discipline referrals for things that are within your control within the classroom. So it could just be your procedures. They're asking to see, are you organized and do you have structure in your classroom to make sure that you can minimize any type of major classroom disturbances. So these questions are going to give the administration a broad picture of how you handle yourself and how you de-escalate conflict in dangerous situations. Moving along to curriculum planning. So one of the questions that might be asked is describe your unit planning process. So essentially, I start with a standard. You could assess your students on the standards first to see where they are, to see if you even really need to spend a lot of time on that standard. Or you could just look at what the curriculum is provided to you by the district and then work from there with the standard and then the skills and all that kind of stuff. You could also say that you look at your state standardized test and looking at how those questions are asked, looking at the assessment blueprint on how the sections are divided and the percentages of each question type and sub test. You could go in that direction as well. Another question that could be asked about your curriculum planning could be how would you incorporate cross-curricular standards within your subject area? Example, STEM and STEAM. So one of my previous schools, we went through the Tennessee STEM designation process. And so it was a requirement as an English language arts teacher that I work with the STEM teachers, specifically with my math partners or counterparts. And we had to work on projects, one project per 9 weeks that incorporated as many standards as we could, but basically putting English language arts and math together along with some type of technology component. And then also, what is your experience with collaborative planning? So, are you a team player? Do you contribute to the planning of big units with your colleagues? So, these curriculum planning questions are going to assess your level of organization as an instructional leader and how well you can collaborate with your colleagues to deliver quality instruction throughout the grade level. So, if we have a strong grade level, then definitely we're going to see those gains on the standardized tests. All right, moving right along to inclusion co-teaching. So most likely if you teach a tested subject area, you have special ed students, you're going to have a special ed teacher in the room or an assistant in there as well to assist you with our sped students. So here are a couple of scenario-based questions that you need to work through. You are scheduled to teach a class that includes several SPED students with an inclusion teacher. How would you and the inclusion teacher collaborate using a co-teaching model? So, how would you plan for that? Do you teach a section of the lesson and then the SPED teacher does the small group, or do you teach 50% and the SPED teacher teaches the other 50%? Like, how would you work that out? And to the second scenario, do you have experience utilizing a co-teaching inclusion instructional model, and explain? So basically, with these, most likely you're going to be paired with an inclusion teacher to meet the needs of your SPED students, and your administration is looking to gauge your comfort level of collaborating with the inclusion co-teacher and the ability to adapt to the student IEPs. Also, keep in mind student accommodations, like how would you put those into practice along with the special ed teacher. And then extracurricular activities. So this is huge, especially if you're going for those competitive schools that you really want to get into. Look on their website and see what extracurricular sports and activities are available, and make sure that you sell yourself on that you are interested in sponsoring or coaching that club or sport. So, are you interested in sponsoring any extracurricular sports or clubs? Why? And then also list any previous student body activities that you have coached or led. So for me, whenever I was transitioning from my urban school district to a more suburban school district, I volunteered, or not volunteered, but I basically told them that I was interested in volleyball, and I was able to be an assistant coach to the middle school girls volleyball team for 2 years. And so that kind of helped get my foot in the door. Whenever I left that school within the same district and I went to a more rural school, they needed a yearbook sponsor. And so that was right up my alley. And so, with saying that, I would be willing to take over the yearbook. Um, that helped solidify me above other candidates. So make sure that you like the clubs that you want to sponsor or the sports that you want to coach. But basically, the admin is looking for ways which you would contribute to the school community outside of regular instruction. So make sure you look at that school website and see what's available. And then compile a list of things that you would be interested in leading. We're always looking for leaders within our teachers. And then why this school? This is always very interesting uh, because it gauges whether or not this applicant is incredibly desperate for a teaching job, like they're not a good teacher and everybody's passed them over, or maybe this teacher has been strategic and they know what schools they want to interview for and they know what schools they would love to be hired at. And so these are interesting. So make sure you have a answer for this question or these questions as you're applying. So why are you interested in joining our school? What makes our school one of your top preferences? And why should we invite you to join our school? Community. So basically, sell yourself on why this school is so interesting and this school is your top pick. So the question behind this is to ask why you're applying for the specific position at the school. They're looking for answers to why you left your previous position. And one of the interviews that I sat in on, I was part of the interview panel, and a teacher brought his his resignation letter from a previous district, and it was his letter of resignation, and it was from HR, basically saying that he was dropped from the position, and it didn't offer any details about that. And he brought that to the interview, and it was really telling. It was just gave a lot of questions. It wasn't a good look as a professional. So please have some type of answer for why you're interested in joining the school. Don't bring up, oh, my previous school let me go and I have no idea why, and that's why I'm applying for this school. All right, and so Here are some interview question resources from Edutopia. They have an article, and I'll link this in the description. 11 questions you'll be asked in a teaching interview. And then Indeed has 50 teacher interview questions and answers to help you prepare. And then, of course, We Are Teachers has 18 interview questions that every teacher must be able to answer. All right, so I'll see you in part 3.